Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. There will be a meeting of the New Hampshire Fish and Game Commission on Tuesday, January 20th, 2026 at 1 p.m. at New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, which is today, obviously. If we could all just stand up and give a Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Also, not on the agenda, but I would like to give a moment of silence for former Commissioner Bill Kearney of Merrimack County, who recently passed. I know there's a couple commissioners that potentially knew him. I don't know if you guys want to say anything, but got a, 30 seconds if you want to mention anything about Bill Kearney. I think he was in your seat before, but.
Yeah, I'll just say that when I joined the commission back in 2017, I think he was the first person to reach out to me and was a wealth of historical knowledge and perspective, and just somebody who could give you both sides of the story and really help you understand what the department and the commission had been working on when he was on board. So it's I think a loss for conservation and sportsmen and women in New Hampshire.
Yeah, go ahead, Gene.
Yeah, I may not be able to say anything, but Bill was a good friend and a better friend of the department. I don't know if there's no more ardent supporter of the Fish and Game Department than Bill Kearney over the years.
I'll agree, 100%.
And he was a good friend of mine all through my legislative years and helped on a lot of things. We worked together on a number of issues, and he will be missed.
Thank you.
Just a few quick ones.
Yes.
He was a personal friend of mine, and he was one of the best sportsman's advocates that we've ever had. And Bill came from Mass, so I say he's the best thing that ever come up with Puck. For sportsman's rights and that. He's a wonderful person. We all the sportsmen owe him everything.
Right.
And he's going to be sadly missed.
Is this an inappropriate time for me to mention I'm originally from Massachusetts? The public is entitled to attend all commission meetings, and when recognized by the chairman, the public may speak on any item on the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to limit public comments to the extent necessary for orderly conduct. I ask when we do that part, just everybody show a little empathy towards each other and keep things civil. First action item, approval of the December 16th, 2025 commission meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
I got a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Sorry, man, I stumble on this part every time for whatever reason. Well, let's call that to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
2, consent items. The following items have been grouped together and noticed as consent agenda items to expedite action on routine matters, which may not require public discussion. Commission members may remove certain items if further public input or discussion is deemed necessary. Item 2A, approval to accept the donation of $1,000 from Whitetails Unlimited made to the Wildlife Division for use in rough grouse habitat management. It's very kind of them, all those deer eating all that grouse habitat. 2B, approval to accept the following donations made to Advanced Search and Rescue Team totaling $850. Jerry and Heidi Little for $500, Roger Brown for $200, Carla Rattenberg in memory of John Jack Holden $100, Glenn Anderson in memory of John Jack Holden for $50. Item 2C, approval to accept the donation of $250 from Thomas Quarles for use by the Public Boat Access Program. Can I entertain a motion to approve items 2A through 2C?
So moved. I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Number 3, approval to accept a monthly donation of $50, $600 annually from Rinsky Simon of New York, New York for deposit into small gifts and donations account and used to support wildlife habitat. The director did ask me if we wanted to do this in one motion, which I think is appropriate, rather than breaking it off over the annual monthly deposit. So if there's no objections to that, we can make a motion.
Move to approve annually.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Number 4, approval to submit FIS 800 rules on import, possession, use of wildlife to JALCAR. Dan Bergeron.
Dan Bergeron, Chief of the Wildlife Division. These rules were brought to you as an information item back in November, I believe. They were set to expire this month, so we were largely adopting them with very little change. It was mostly moving the forms to a reference on our, to a link on our website, and then some, we were working back and forth with the lawyers over at JLCR, fixing references and things like that. Since November, the only change that's worth noting that has been made was in FIS 81401. So there's a change. We changed the date when field trials can no longer be held on department properties that also serve as pheasant stalking sites. And that, we caught that just, the change is because of the new youth pheasant weekend. So otherwise, there would be a conflict between our pheasant weekend and field trials. So we just changed the date on when that could occur. It was September 28th, now it'll be the last Wednesday of September, so it doesn't overlap with our new youth pheasant weekend. And that's the only change that's been made since, the only real substantive change that would have been made with the rules. We did hold the public hearing on January 14th. There were 4 people that attended that hearing. There were some questions, there were no real comments as to additional changes to the rules. With that, I can take any questions.
Any questions from the commissioners? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve to submit the FIS 800 rules to JALCAR.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next is legislative actions, which is our newest member at Fish and Game, Melissa Nemeth. Is this where we're going to do our actual?
That's what you want to do, the committee meetings, is that what you mean?
Yeah,
That's up to you.
we'll do it during the committee. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet you all. As Commissioner DeRosa said, my name is Melissa Nemeth. I'm the legislative liaison for the department. So I can give an update on the legislative actions that have taken place since the last commission meeting. There were a few bills heard in both the House and the Senate. There's HB 1046 in the House, which would be enabling a person to carry a firearm on a snowmobile off their private property. That would be a loaded firearm. The department testified in opposition on that bill, and the committee has not taken any executive action on that bill yet. HB 1440 was a bill related to properties enrolled in carbon sequestration programs. The hearing was held on the department testified in opposition, and the committee has not acted on that bill yet. HB 1530, which would require notification of butters and the public prior to disturbing certain beaver dams in non-emergency situations. The department testified in opposition, although subsequently the sponsor has indicated they may be willing to submit an amendment that would alleviate some of the department and commission concerns relative to beaver dams on state property. So that will be one we'll continue to monitor for any amendments. And HB 1699, which would enable the carriage of certain firearms on slow-moving boats, had a hearing held. The department testified in opposition, but the committee has not taken action yet. Over in the Senate, there were a series of bills. The first 3 bills that I will reference were all had public hearings, went right into executive session, and were unanimously voted passed by the Senate committee. modify the definition of veteran as well as change the lifetime hunting and fishing licenses for disabled veterans. It would create a sliding fee scale depending on the percentage of disability that a veteran had. That was passed by the committee, although it will go to a finance committee, and the department did testify in opposition to that bill. And with that sort of a recap of the past week, with that, I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Obviously, letting commissioners know during the legislative meetings, we go into a lot of the stuff into detail, and there's always some good back and forth, so, but thank you. Financial statement. I swear I'm not trying to ignore our financial problems by skipping you, but I'm more responsible than that with my bills, I swear.
Good afternoon, Kathy Labonte, Chief of Business Division. Any questions on December 2025 financial statement? Halfway through the fiscal year.
Go ahead, Chris.
When do we book revenue on the deposits? I've noticed that it's at 0. I'm sure we're realizing revenue from our deposits.
Which deposit?
The interest on savings deposits.
Well, we have an issue with the interest on savings deposits.
Please elaborate.
So Treasury actually posts interest to the fishing game fund on a quarterly basis. So we received our first interest posting the beginning of October. It was for a little over $11,000, which to me was quite low. And so I did some research, not to bore you with all of that, but they're having a hard time between Treasury and DAS determining what the actual balance in the fishing game fund is. And that is what the cash balance, and that is what the interest earnings is based on. So I'm currently working with Rich Bowen, Assistant Treasurer, as well as Karen Burke, the Assistant Comptroller at DAS, to sort all of that out. And so we have received a interest posting. I have not shown it yet because I believe there will be some modifications to it, as well as when we receive that quarterly interest posting, I take that dollar amount and I have a slightly lost. I have various spreadsheets that actually split those funds up into the 5 dedicated accounts internally that we have that turn on the interest. So I can't do that until we get that interest straightened out.
Thank
More
you.
information than we have.
Right. Well, it just struck me as
We haven't
6
had
months
any-
into the fiscal year, we're
Absolutely.
not recognizing any revenue.
Absolutely. And before you ask, we are in the same situation with our indirect cost as we were last year. Only this year, it's much worse due to what's going on at federal level. They anticipate that we will not have a indirect cost rate based on my proposal that I submitted in June until 42 to 45 weeks after they received it, which was June. So you're talking end of April, May, which doesn't help the fishing game fund balance.
Any other questions for Kathy? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to move on to a presentation on the Connecticut Lakes headwaters.
We're sharing such technology.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shawana Lyons, and I am the State Department
park planner and land use administrator for the Division of Parks and Recreation. I help administer the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters easement area in Pittsburgh. Also today is John Soika, who is the manager of the Connecticut Lakes Natural Area. So he's your talent on the natural area, and your talent on the Greater Headwaters property. So way back in 2001, International Paper decided they were going to sell their holdings in Coos County. And it was over 171,000 acres of commercial timberland. The state of New Hampshire, with the help of Governor Shaheen and Senator Judd Gregg at the time, pulled together a task force, recognizing how important this property was to the forest industry and also to the tourism and recreation industry in New Hampshire. So this task force came together. There was a steering committee and a technical committee. I was on that technical committee representing recreation at the time. And a whole bunch of information was pulled together about the property and its importance. So at the recommendation of the steering committee, they envisioned a conservation easement across all the property with a private timberland owner underneath. So this is kind of revolutionary at the time that the state was going to take over that kind of that conservation easement side to it. So the conservation easement, it was imagined, would cover the whole 171,500 acres, and the property would be governing the property forever, no matter who the owner is of the property. So the conservation easement is in perpetuity. So within the easement, it talked about having timber harvesting, securing public permanent rights for the public to have access to the property, continued vehicle access. There's over 260 miles of roads on the property, and have a monitoring and enforcement for that conservation easement underneath it. So it was imagined by the steering committee that a private timberland investor would maintain the North Country tradition of private timberland ownership, keep the majority of the property on the tax rolls, and it would be to manage, allow the private owner to manage the timber, so that they would still have that right to manage the timber if they saw fit. So out of that 171,500 acres, 146,500 are under the conservation easement to the private timber owner. There is some other lands that Fish and Game acquired in fee, which we'll get to in a minute. So the Fish and Game Department acquired some natural areas, about 25,000 acres of that 171,000 for management as natural areas within the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters property. And 10,000 of the 25,000 acres are to be managed for wildlife habitat, including timber harvesting and to encourage wildlife management. And then the public has a permanent right to access that property still. So it is open to the public. So it was as I said, it was a big conservation effort. It took a lot of partners and a lot of money to buy the conservation easement on the property. So money came from the Forest Legacy Program, LCHIP, and the state capital budget. So all those funds for $23,500,000 to buy just the conservation easement on the property. So the conservation easement has lots of chapters to it. I mostly work in the section 5, which is the public's use of the property. And that seems to be what most of the people are interested in generally. So there's many sections, but section 2, use limitations, section 3, reserve rights by the state, and section 5, the affirmative rights and responsibility of the easement holder are the 3 sections in a very long section that are mostly used. And we actually have 2 members of the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters Citizens Committee are on your commission, Jean and Eric. So they're very familiar with the easement and its management. So within the affirmative rights and responsibility of the easement holder, we talk about public access and recreation use on the property. We have to have a management plan for the recreational use and also for road management. So we just completed those 2 plans 2 years ago. So and it's a 5-year plan. So what kind of public access is allowed on the Headwaters property? And on the right-hand side of that screen, the yellow is the conservation easement area, the green are your natural areas, and that spaghetti that's on the in between are all the roads. So there are 3 classifications of roads there that go from a primary road to a secondary road to a tertiary road, and they all have their own management schemes. So you can see that the property is well roaded. So for public access, the easement holder, and DNCR is the easement holder of this property. It has exclusive right and easement to permit and manage pedestrian and vehicular access across for the public. So DNCR is the public access manager on this property. We do consult with the private landowner, but we hold that right. So public access has to be non-commercial. And there are some uses which we often refer to as traditional uses that are without limitation, and that's hunting, fishing, trapping, picnicking, swimming, hiking, cross-country skiing, snowmobiling, nature observation, snowshoeing, and the enjoyment of open space. And that comes right out of the preamble of the conservation easement. We also can permit the public to use and operate snowmobiles on certain designated trails. And so most of the primary and secondary roads are also snowmobile trails. There are some other smaller roads that do make connections, but they have to be a designated snowmobile trail. And all terrain vehicles are also allowed, but it has to be within the public, the recreation management plan. So where they can go. So there's currently about 11 miles of ATV trails on the property, which basically connect one side of the property to the other side of the property, and then exit and go out to the other community trail networks. So as I said, the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources is the easement holder, and 2 divisions manage the easement and the property. So the Division of Forest and Lands is actually the monitor of the property, and they work with Fish and Game to oversee the easement and stewardship plans, including harvesting and managing in the special management areas, which are designated in the easement. Parks and Recreation, who I work for, the public access and recreation managers. The Bureau of Trails takes care of the motorized recreation. The Bureau of Park Operations takes care of the non-motorized recreation. And since I've taken over the land management administration of this, I talk a lot about gravel roads and resurfacing roads. I can't tell you how exciting I am to talk about gravel. So the Fish and Game Department, as I said, is also a partner here in this conservation effort. They have actually real land management ownership here. So as I said, 25,000 acres in ownership, 15,000 acres are nature preserve, 10,000 acres are in a management area. You manage about 29 miles of roads, 24 miles are drivable by the public, about another 5 miles are winter roads, and almost all the users who are recreating on the property also recreate here in the natural areas also. So just kind of a little close-up of the natural areas. The biggest ones are in the northern part of the property, and then there's a little lower one down the southern part of the property. So there is another conservation easement held by the Nature Conservancy for the Connecticut Lakes natural areas. Having a stewardship plan is a requirement of that conservation easement. There are harvest restrictions. There's no cutting in certain areas. Commercial habitat harvests are permitted, and non-commercial habitat improvement. The easement does regulate trail development and use, and of course the Nature Conservancy has the right to inspect the property for monitoring purposes. Another partner for the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters property is the Department of Environmental Services. They own and operate the Murphy Dam. They also have leases that are around the Lake Francis. And they're also responsible for 9 Fish and Game owned dams on the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters property. So as I said, we have a citizens committee who advises the state agencies on our management of the property. So each member has a 3-year term and is about, I think, 18 or so commission members at this point. So the House and the Senate get to appoint people, communities appoint people, the Leaseholders Association appoints people, so it's a really good, broad group of people bringing many interests in. The members select their chairperson from a member of the public, and currently the chairperson is Gail Hansen. If that name's familiar, she was executive director for the New Hampshire Snowmobile Association for many, many years. So she's the current chair. And the committee meets at least annually by law, but generally we meet twice a year unless we need to meet again. We just finished our planning for the rec plan and the road plan. We were meeting very often for that, so we're probably back to a twice a year meeting at this point. So the committee provides advice to the state agencies on recreational management, and they also have some other advice they provide about siting leases and management of the state parks and natural areas within the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters area. More things that they talk about in the law is provide advice on the stewardship management plans that are required by the conservation easement, and just skipping here, whether or not the state can build visitor support facilities, also advising the state agencies like Fish and Game on the management of the flood areas with the dam. So, how do we pay for it all? So when the conservation project went ahead, the money was put into buying the easement, but the nonprofit helpers on this also recognized the state was going to, not have a revenue stream for this property. So we have all the management, but none of the revenue. So they fundraise for endowments for the property. So there are 3 endowments that are established by law for the property, and the nonprofit partners got us the base fee, and now we just live off the interest on that. So the monitoring endowment is a 50-50 split between the Division of Forests and Lands and the Fish and Game Department, and the base investment is $1,250,000. The stewardship fund is split 70% to Parks and Recreation and 30% to Fish and Game. And the base is $1,500,000. So the split comes from how much of the property do you have management responsibilities for. So stewardship, 70% is Parks and Recreation managing, 30% from the land base is Fish and Game. The roads, there's 89% is Parks and Recreation, 11% Fish and Game, and the base amount is $1,225,000. And that's also based on the miles of roads that each agency manages. So DNCR manages 89% of the public roads, Fish and Game manages 11%. So I know I just flew through that, but if anybody has any questions, I can try to answer it. I can also send information, contact me, and I can put you to our website and all the emails and things like that.
Commissioner Train.
Could you just email that presentation?
Sure. Yeah. It's on our website too.
It's in the packet too.
No, I know that. I just want.
Any other commissioners have any questions? Thank you. Wonderful piece of property for anybody who's ever been there. Obviously a significant impact on our state. And I hope as more properties come available, something like this happens again. So,
yeah, I just wanted to mention, so Hannah's from DNCR, and as she mentioned, John, you want to stand up and introduce yourself? for those of you who don't know, John is acting as my designee on this, and he works heavily up there in the area, and those two are like hand in hand. They work very close together on this, and thank you, Johanna, for coming and presenting this today.
Yes, thank you. No questions? All right. So next we're going to move on to, do we have any additional business or old business? I don't believe so this
Yes,
meeting.
we have a
You gotta
letter
do the
of
pledge of
presentation.
allegiance.
Oh man, I'm just skipping things today. I'm trying to rush through you on this. Marine Division Research Management Update. Renee.
No, it's not Renee.
Oh,
It's
right. I'm sorry, Josh Carloni.
You got it.
Got that Italian last name, I can get
I
that.
don't know if you guys wanted to see them, it was requested, so you can pass those around.
Yeah.
okay. Good.
So I'll just go ahead and get started, is that all right?
Go for it, Josh.
So Josh Carloni, I oversee the lobster monitoring and research programs for the Marine Division, as well as we do some work with Jonah Craft. So today I'm just going to be going through, it's rather long, but I hope you find it entertaining. I'm going to go through some of the biology, management, and some current research that we've been doing with the department. And so this is just the species range. We don't need to go on this very long, but it's from Canada down to the mid-Atlantic. And so biology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about lobster biology. Water temperature plays a very important role from everything from molting and growth to mating, egg development, larval development. So this, we have a little video here, but so in order for a lobster to grow, it needs to shed its hard exoskeleton. And it's kind of preparing for that throughout the year. And what it has done is, underneath that hard shell, it's created a shell almost identical underneath. And when it's time for it to molt, it actually starts pumping in water to create some pressure to try to get out of that shell. And so this video will describe exactly what happens. You can see it kind of breaks apart in the middle between the carapace and the abdomen, and it just pulls itself out. Yeah. And so that old shell you can actually put right back together, and in many cases the claws are still intact, so it's literally just pulled itself right out of there. And the new shell is extremely soft, like Jell-O, and so they'll hide out for couple of weeks, depending on water temperature, until they harden up enough to kind of start walking around. So maturity, this is the size at which lobsters become sexually mature. And in the Gulf of Maine, right off our coast in New Hampshire, research has shown that about 50% of them are mature at 83 millimeters, and that is 3 1/4 inches, which is also the minimum legal size. So at the minimum legal size, you can take a lobster, only 50% are sexually mature. So mating. Mating's pretty interesting with lobsters. So a female, in order for them to mate, the female has to molt, just like I showed you in that other video. And what happens is she will find a shelter, she'll protect it. When it's time for her to molt and mate, she releases a pheromone. It allows the male to know it's time to come in. They come in, they cohabitate for a period of time. And then they mate, and what he does, this should work here. Videos are all. There it goes. So what happens is she molts. The male actually turns her upside down, kind of cradles her, and then they mate. You'll see the bottom of the female's claws here when she pulls herself out of that shell. And this happens pretty quick. You don't want to blink or you'll miss it. So that's how quick it was. And again, that's sped up, so it's not as quick as that, but kind of cool. And why that's important is, so what the male does is he inserts a spermatophore inside the seminal receptacle, and that arrow there is pointing to the seminal receptacle. So she will store that sperm inside of that for up to a year, at which time she will extrude eggs. And she extrudes them through, you see that little circle, to the top there. It's a gonopore. She extrudes them through that. She actually lies on her back, extrude eggs through that pore. They're fertilized by going across that seminal receptacle, and then she holds them for about 12 months. And this is what they look like on her abdomen. These are newly extruded eggs. As they start to mature through the season, they start to look a little different. So this would be, if she extruded those in September of year A, this would be year B, where they start to show eye spots. And this is a little later. I circled a little eye spot there, though it's probably hard for you to see. And then they start to hatch that next year, usually in like June through August. And if you pull this up in a trap, it looks just like that. It's hatched probably like 50% of its eggs. But it doesn't really do any justice to this process that they're doing underneath the water. And so a colleague at UNH got this video, and you can see the female kind of stands erect on her legs and flips her pleopods. And what you see behind there are little stage 1 larvae coming up. You can see those little white things floating towards the surface. And she'll do it again. And they don't all go at one time. It takes a number of days for her to hatch all these eggs. But you can see those larvae, and they're attracted to the light, so they go to the surface of the ocean. And then they molt through 2 different stages. They go to molt stage 2, 3, and then this post-larval lobster that you see is that final picture in that sequence there. And these guys are probably the coolest part of American lobster life history. They can actually swim on the surface of the ocean. So those first 3 stages are kind of floating. They're going with the currents, and then they molt to that 4th stage, and they can actually swim. They're nicknamed super lobsters. And I have a video. This is from our 38-foot research vessel. We caught this in a net, and you can see it. They're quite fast. They can go like 13 to 18 centimeters per second. And so these are on this, all those larval stages I said are on the surface of the ocean. And we think that these guys can swim so good because they want to get to kind of coastal nearshore nursery habitats where they can then swim down to the bottom. They find a cobble bed. They molt to what we call stage 5. And at that point, they can no longer swim. They're on the ocean floor for the rest of their life. So we think that they can swim like this because if they're 10, 15 miles offshore, they need to get inshore to these warm, nutrient-rich coastal nursery habitats. And so going a little bit into management, lobster is the most valuable single-species fishery in the United States and Canada. It's managed cooperatively by Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission along with both state and federal partners. So we in New Hampshire are a state partner. And population assessments are conducted every 5 years. So I sit on a committee where we assess the population about every 5 years and present that to a management board. And since it ranges such a long distance in the United States, we split this up into different stocks. So Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank stock in the dark gray, and Southern New England in the light gray. And that's for a variety of reasons. Growth is different, movement patterns are different, but that's the 2 stocks that we assess the population. And currently there are several management measures already in place. There's a minimum legal size. There's number of traps that you can fish. It's illegal to take egg-bearing females. You have to V-notch, that's that little notch in that picture there. You have to V-notch females that you catch that have eggs on them. And then that protects that female for at least 2 molts after that. So how do scientists assess the population? With all these little lobsters walking around in the ocean, how do we assess what the population is doing? We look at these 5 things, and I'll go through each, but landings, biological data, survey data, and environmental data, as well as current research. So landings data is pretty straightforward. All commercial lobstermen have to report their catch so that we know how many lobsters are being taken out of the ocean on an annual basis. And so what you can see here is that line that looks like it's going to the top of that figure, that y-axis, that is landings in the Gulf of Maine from 1982, I believe, until 2024. And you can see this peak here. That's the highest level landings have ever been in the Gulf of Maine. And you can see that it's come down a little bit since then, and that's about 150 million pounds around that time. And it's down to, I think, 110 or 15 million pounds. New Hampshire of that accounts for about 7 million pounds. And then the southern New England stock, which I showed you in that light gray, it's on a different scale. There was never an enormous fishery compared to the Gulf of Maine, but there's definitely lobsters down there. But you can see around 2000, that population started to tank, and that's kind of the story you'll hear as we move forward. And then we collect biological data, so biologists from Fish and Game ride aboard commercial lobsterman vessels, and that's done in mass in Maine and throughout the range of the species. And what we're collecting is length, how many eggers there are, sex ratio, and all of this is used to assess the population. And then we have a number of surveys that we look at that are very important. So we have a trawl survey, and for those who don't know, basically that's in a big net that's hauled behind a boat, and it's a multi-species survey, so they catch both finfish as well as lobsters and crabs to assess trends over time. The one that we are most involved with is the Maine-New Hampshire trawl survey. So we have a cooperative agreement with Maine and a boat that fishes trawls throughout New Hampshire all the way up into Maine. And so this is the trends that we're looking at. This is since 2003, I believe. But you can see that there's an increase to around 2018, 19, and then it begins to decrease after that with some modest increases towards the end. And again, I should have mentioned this is spring and fall. And they both tell a pretty similar story, that we got to a very high population level and then it began to decrease a little bit. Southern New England's kind of the opposite trend. It was pretty high in the 90s and then began to tank in the early 2000s and hasn't rebounded since. We also have a ventless trap survey, so we have a 38-foot research vessel that the department owns and runs, and we run a trap survey out of this vessel. And basically, a commercial trap has vents in it so that sublegal lobsters can get out. So most of the lobsters that enter a trap, it showed that only about 6% are retained in a commercial trap. The rest come in, they eat, and they leave. So we block those vents so they can't get out. And what you're looking at there is kind of a typical catch in those traps. We have just a lot of sublegal lobsters so that you can see what the population is doing over time. And this is flipped, but Southern New England's on the top of the ventless trap survey. You see that decline over time, whereas the Gulf of Maine shows a pretty similar trajectory to that trawl survey, where it increased and we're back down to kind of those moderate levels. This doesn't show the context of back in the 80s, which the federal trawl survey would, so just keep that in mind as we move forward. And the other one, probably maybe our most interesting survey, is the American Lobster Settlement Survey. It's a dive-based survey. It's conducted with all those red dots you see. We have 4 sites in New Hampshire, and basically what it is you have a tank attached to a tube which creates suction, and everything that it's like a big vacuum, and it goes into that catch bag at the top. I actually have a little video here as well of myself and Kevin Sullivan doing a dive. We do these every fall. But basically you can see me there with the tube, and there's Kevin with the big rocks, and then I'm just trying to suck up everything that's underneath those rocks. And you'll get a variety of crabs and lobsters and finfish, as well as urchins. So we do this at 4 sites and 12 of these quadrats at each site. So it's 2 dives at each site in the fall where the weather can be a little bit tricky at times. And this is a good catch, but this is a catch from one of our sites back in 2011, I think. And you can see everything next to that quarter. That's young of the year, otherwise known as like a baby lobster. And those would have been lobsters that settled in that year. So those post larvae I showed you, they could swim so well, they swim down to the bottom, hang out in rocks, molt, and then that's a young of the year. It's made it back to the bottom of the ocean. And those lobsters probably go up to about 3 years old, the bigger ones there. And then, so what does a young of the year time series look like if we look at it over time? This goes back to 1995, I think, and what you had was this big, you had a lot of these baby lobsters on the bottom in the 2000s, followed by this low period in the 2010s that you can see there. And so this was kind of had everybody scratching their head, and that you had all these eggers at that time period, this high abundance of lobsters, but fewer baby lobsters. And we'll put a pin in that and come back. So how do all these data come together to determine the health of the population? Well, there's a fairly complex model used, but at the end of the day, you can see at the top there, we're just following trends of what all those surveys are telling us. And what the model allows you to do is, if you think about a population, which in the middle there you have a stock with that black lobster, what makes it grow are births, so little lobsters recruiting into the fishery, and growth. As those lobsters grow, they weigh more. And what detracts from that would be natural mortality, so predation, like things from wolffish and striped bass, as well as fishing mortality, so lobsters just being taken out to be eaten. And so those are put into that model, all that information, but we're generally just following what the trends are. And this is what the trend looks like. This is what we call reference abundance in the Gulf of Maine since the late 80s. And you can see it looks a lot like that landings plot that I showed you. So we got to the highest levels we've ever seen, and it's come down a little bit since then, but we're still at pretty high levels if you look at it compared to the historic values. And we're above both the limit and the threshold, though there has been, if you look at that peak, and I think it's 2017, there's still been a substantial decline, but again, still at high levels. And in southern New England, you can see that it's just kind of tanked and it continues to go lower and lower. And so what's going on in southern New England? Well, the water temperature there is really too warm for lobsters in a lot of areas. Historical places like Buzzards Bay, Long Island Sound, Narragansett Bay used to house a lot of good lobster population, and now it's just become a little bit too warm. Anything over like 68 degrees, lobsters just tend to have disease, move out of that area. So that seems to be the biggest story. And then you also have different predators that come in with warmer water temperatures. So southern New England, the outlook is not great. All the numbers are going down except temperatures are going up. In the Gulf of Maine, the population is still above the threshold and limit, but we are seeing declines. There's concerns over the baby lobsters that I told you about. And so the big question, as I mentioned earlier, is why are the abundance of these baby lobsters declining in the Gulf of Maine while the abundance of eggers and just general abundance is pretty high? And so we, the department led a couple of research papers that we published in 2018 and another in 2024 looking at this exact problem, this exact issue. And I'm just going to go through that fairly quickly here, but it's a pretty interesting story. So you have, as I said, a lot of egg-bearing lobsters in the Gulf of Maine at a time period throughout the 2010s, but that young of the year, those babies are at low levels. So we looked at, Norman Doe Associates has been hauling these Newston nets, and what this net does is catch those lobster larvae that I showed you that are on the surface of the water. And they've been doing this since 1988 at a few different sites. So a very valuable data set. And so I began to look into this and looking at this data set to see what it showed. And sure, so these are the larval stages that it catches, primarily 1 and 4, because those are right on the surface. And so what it showed was that stage 1, so those ones that just hatched off the female on the bottom, that first larval stage, is going up just like egg-bearing females. So a lot of eggers, a lot of stage 1. This all kind of makes sense, except for that last larval stage. The post-larval stage has been going down and is at some of the lower levels we had seen in that 2010s time period. And so we wanted to see, do those post-larvae look anything like what we're seeing on the bottom? So maybe there's another disconnect between that post-larval stage and the young of the year stage. And so we looked at a few of these settlement survey areas, the dive survey areas, and remarkably, what we were seeing in the nets with those post-larvae match up almost identically to what we're seeing on the bottom with the young of the year. And I'll just show you a couple of examples, but this is one to the south of us. I don't show New Hampshire because our time series was rather short at this time. And then up in Maine. So it doesn't seem like anything's if they make it to that post-larval stage, they seem to be settling. Doesn't seem to be anything there. So what we had was a lot of eggers, a lot of these stage 1, but not many post-larvae. So the disconnect seems to be between that stage 1 and that post-larval stage. And so we started looking at things like temperature, wind, predation, trying to figure out why they're not making it to that post-larval stage, or maybe they're getting blown offshore. And we didn't find anything with any of those factors, but then we started looking at food. So that stage 1, in order for it to get to stage 2, 3, and then to full post-larval stage, it needs a lot of food, and like high-quality food. And so Normando had another survey that they had been conducting for a period of time, and what they catch is basically like zooplankton, so it's like the insects of the sea, is kind of the base of the food chain. And we looked at all these different species to see if there was any correlation between these post-larval lobsters, and what we found was Calanus finmarchicus, which is a lipid-rich copepod, whales feed on it. There we did find a correlation, and so if you look at this 30-year time series with the post-larval lobsters in Calanus finmarchicus, they follow each other pretty well in that when you have high abundance of this food source, this lipid-rich food source, you get a lot of these post-larval lobsters. But when you don't have a lot of this food source, our hypothesis is they're not making it to that post-larval stage. And so I'll breeze through this slide, but we also found that it's the timing of when this Calanus is out. In that second plot there, you can see if Calanus comes out in the spring before stage 1 is even in the water column, this is a mismatch and doesn't seem to do them any good. But in years where they match up, like that first panel there, you seem to get good abundance of those post-larval lobsters. So it's this kind of double whammy where they need a high abundance of it, as well as they also need a good temporal match there. So does this mean that without this food source or low abundance, there's no lobsters are going to settle on the bottom? No, we just think it means that when environmental conditions line up, there's a lot of this Calanus in the water, you're getting really good settlement on the bottom. And so I just have, I think, 2 more quick slides here. So that's our Department 38-foot vessel. We do a lot of research and monitoring out of this vessel. Law enforcement uses it too for a number of their trap details and things of that nature. So a couple other things we've been doing on there. Those 2 folks are building ocean drifters, and we released a number of these off the coast of New Hampshire to mimic how lobster larvae would drift over, as I said, that month-long time period. And here's just a quick plot of where these drifted over that month-long period. So that you can see, we released them at those 4 distances from the coast, and you can see that these lobster larvae can drift pretty far distances. And so the question is, if you're that purple grouping out there, can a post larvae swim all the way back to shore where it probably needs to be? It doesn't want to settle in 200 feet of mud where, you know, predators are just going to pick it off right away. And then I think this is the final slide. We also put about 18,000 tags on lobsters. So you can see it's a little streamer tag. You can see it on that lobster up in the upper left. And what we found was, if you look at that second plot, I think this becomes most clear. All the orange circles are where we released them, and the yellow circles are where they moved to, and the black line connects those two. And so you can see that they moved far distances. So they would be tagged on a commercial vessel, thrown back in the water, and then lobstermen will report them when they catch them again. And you can see some of those in the middle of the Gulf of Maine move long distances all the way to Outer Cape Cod. And so these guys are rather complex in their movements, which we don't fully understand why they're going to move 120 miles or 150 miles in that direction. But we're trying to learn every day. And then last slide is all of this isn't possible without all these organizations and everybody contributing to this, as far as all our monitoring programs, research programs, and everything else. So that's it.
Josh, exceptional presentation, and love just the passion behind the science and seeing New Hampshire Fish and Game involved in such important stuff. Does anybody in the commission have any questions? Trent?
So what's the percentage overall that's survival from?
From egg to settlement?
Yeah, is it like
I
10%?
I don't think we have a great idea on that. I always have said, and through some papers, that probably, I don't know how accurate they are anymore, because predation changes, environmental things change, but I'd say less than 1% of those eggs that hatch.
Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Titone?
Noticing that the eggers, they're getting smaller and smaller. We're really catching shots now
Yeah.
that are egged out.
Yeah.
Now, will that shot lobster shed its shell prior to her hatching those eggs?
No, they shouldn't. That would be pretty uncommon for that to happen. Once they've egged out, they're gonna basically skip a molt that year, and then they're gonna hatch their eggs out the next year. The problem, and we're seeing smaller eggers too, like as things have warmed up, the Gulf of Maine, the size of maturity's gone down, so there's smaller lobsters egging out. So we've seen it too. The problem is what they found is those larvae are not quite as hardy as they are from like a bigger female, but they still can contribute.
With the amount of short lobsters that are egging out, does that indicate there's a stress on the population?
It can indicate there's a stress in the population that they do that, but in this case, I think it's that the water temperature is warm. And you can see if you look in southern New England, where it's much warmer, so 76 millimeters compared to 83. They're reaching that sexual maturity at a much smaller size in southern New England, where the water temperature is warmer. So in this case, I think it's just a water temperature.
Are you seeing a trend of decreasing water temperatures now in the Gulf of Maine?
I mean, if you look at like the long-term trends, they're going to go up. But recently, there has been a downturn from that really accelerated trend that you see. And then also, if you're looking at surface water temperature, it's going to show you a much different than bottom water temperatures. So I do think, some of that is warming faster than 99.9% of the world's oceans. Although that is true, that was basically based on surface water temperature, not bottom water temperature. So lobsters are still in a pretty sweet spot in the Gulf of Maine,
Right.
water temperature-wise.
Thank you.
When you have an egger and the lobsterman gets it in the trap, they put a V knot
Yeah.
in the tail. Does that V knot ever go away from shedding?
Yeah, it's usually 2 molts before it completely goes away. It's called zero tolerance in the Gulf of Maine. So basically that flipper has to go back to perfect in order for someone to keep it. Even if it has just a little indentation, they can't keep it. So it's 2 to 3 molts depending on how big it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good, very good.
Okay.
I have another question.
Go ahead, Jim.
We're seeing a lot of prevalence of shy disease, especially with the females. And how is that potentially affecting their ability to egg out?
So we've seen an increase too. I keep going back to Southern New England, but they'll have like up to 30+% of their females have shell disease. So we think it's linked to water temperature. The quality, I can't think of like a study off the top of my head where they're looking at the quality of those eggs based upon the severity of shell disease. But I do know that it stresses them out. They can have trouble molting because the shell disease goes into that shell that they're creating below, and there can be some mortality and stuff like that. But as far as like what effect it has on egg quality, I don't have the answer off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris?
When you think about the change in water temperature, what does that mean for predation? Species that maybe weren't as present here that are now fish species. What's going on there?
Yeah, so what happens with so I mentioned water temperature in southern New England. So it acts in several different ways. So it's acting on just disease will set in. It's acting on their movement and how stressed they'll be. But it's also acting on what predators from other areas from down south are gonna come up into this area. So in southern New England, they saw this huge expansion in black sea bass. And black sea bass, we know, predate on small lobsters. So you get lots of things like that with warming water temperatures. We're seeing more black sea bass up here now, but you get these range expansions of these species that then interact with lobster in ways they may not have in the past. So it's kind of like they're getting hit from a lot of different sides.
Any other commissioners?
I just one other thing. I think it was an excellent presentation, and I think it does highlight how important science is and scientific research is to the department and the goals driving forward to help the department manage everything in the state of New Hampshire.
Absolutely. Love seeing scientific papers with some of our team. That's exceptional. I know it's resources are not always make those things easy, but thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have anything under additional business today? I don't believe so. Or old business? So on the committee reports, legislative committee, I'm going to hand it over to Commissioner Stoll, who's chair of that committee, to go over some new legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We met prior to the commission meeting this morning and went through the rest of the legislative, the bills that we needed to act upon. And I'll go through each one of them. And I'll make the motion, and I got Commissioner Cavaney is going to second it. We need a motion and a second before you can even discuss. That's why we run it that way. We'll go to first one is Senate Bill 620 FN, relative to the refusal of consent for testing to be determined alcohol concentration and penalties for aggravated driving while intoxicated. The committee met and we voted to support this legislation, so I'll make a motion to support Senate Bill 620 FN.
I will second.
The motion is to support Senate Bill 620. Is there any discussion, any questions from the commission? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next one will be Senate Bill 553 FN, relative to penalties for attempting to elude pursuit by law enforcement. I move to support Senate Bill 553 FN.
I will second that.
The motion is to support Senate Bill 553. Any questions from the commission? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next bill is Senate Bill 411, relative to the procedure concerning search warrant inventory. I move to support Senate Bill 411.
I will second that.
The motion is to support Senate Bill 411. Is there any discussion from the commission? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Next bill is Senate Bill 409, relative to the penalties for the offense of disobeying an officer. I move to support Senate Bill 409.
I will second.
Motion is support Senate Bill 409, was that correct?
Yes.
Any discussion from the commission? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I should have been saying this before. Anybody against? Motion passes.
Next bill is House Bill 1199, enabling the Fish and Game Department to create a permit and fee for the use of fish and game staff by other state agencies and departments. I move to support House Bill 1199.
I will second that.
The motion is support House Bill 1199. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes.
Next bill is House Bill 1167, enabling the use of ferrets for hunting. I move to oppose House Bill 1167.
I will second that.
The motion is to oppose House Bill 1167. Any discussion from the commission? Not seeing any. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Motion passes.
Next bill is House Bill 1216, relative to informed consent for law enforcement searches of houses and other property. Move to support House Bill 1216.
I will second that.
The motion is to support House Bill 1216. Any discussion from the commission? Not seeing any. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Next bill is concurrent resolution 15, relating to the right to hunt, fish, and harvest game and fish. Move to support concurrent resolution 15.
I will second that.
The motion is to support Resolution 15. Any discussion from the commission? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Next one is House Bill 1238, relative to the penalties for the offense of disobeying an officer. I move to support House Bill 1238 FM.
I will second that.
The motion is to support House Bill 1238. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Go ahead.
Good.
Okay, sorry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Motion passes.
Next one is House Bill 1833, an act creating a special license for non-resident vessel operators participating in tuna tournaments. I move to oppose House Bill 1833 FM.
I will second that.
The motion is to oppose House Bill 1833. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Motion passes.
Next one is House Bill 1410 FM, creating a new classification for electric vehicles. Move to oppose House Bill 1410 FM.
I will second that.
The motion is to oppose House Bill 1410. Any discussion? Not seeing any discussion. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes.
Next one is House Bill 1703 FM, relative to establishing a registration fee for bicycles and electric bicycles using state or municipal funded bike paths, trails, or roadway. Move to oppose House Bill 1703.
I will second that.
The motion is to oppose 1703 House Bill. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Next one is House Bill 1533 FM, relative to the use of electric bicycles and alternative electric micromobility devices. I move to oppose House Bill 1533 FM.
I will second that.
The motion is to oppose House Bill 1533. Any discussion? Not seeing any discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for today. I think we've covered all the bills that are out there that affect us. We've got a bunch of amendments coming in all over the place. And at this time, I would like to make a motion that we add Melissa, wherever she is, Melissa, to this committee that we've set up that consists of myself, the director, the colonel, and Melissa, to listen to amendments that come in and vote on them, because there's not enough time to call a commission meeting. Because there's a law on the books that says we have to notify the commission and the committee 10 days in advance, and it's just not capable. So I'd like to make a motion to add Melissa to that select committee.
I will second that.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion to add Melissa Nemeth to that team of people on making last-minute decisions on these bills? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I'd just like to remind everybody that his committee discussed all these bills in detail when they meet. I know it seems like we're going through a lightning round here, and these are actually talked to great detail, often at exhausting lengths. So I encourage the public to show up for those meetings if it's something that interests you. Further on the committees, everybody should have got paper. A couple changes that were made, given that now I'm the chair. I've moved Commissioner Trahan to be chair of the Public Engagement and Education Committee. On top of that, we are going to be removing Kevin Jordan, not because you do a bad job, but because you're a busy guy. And we're going to add Tanya, who has always been very involved in the process, which thank you, because you have always kept me organized, and I don't make it easy for you. So that's that change. The second major change is that the governance committee is now going to be chaired by Commissioner Poole. A big thing here is getting our handbook updated, specifically as it relates to the governance of our literal commission. So calling that in order, there is some past language that needs to be updated that former commissions have voted on that hasn't been brought to date, and there are some pressing issues to just get things set up and up to date. So thank you for both of you for agreeing to take those on. Moving on to the next part would be commissioner reports. Any commissioners have any reports, old business, new business, anything here?
I have an update on the Rivers Management Advisory Commission.
Yes, thank you.
So the Rivers Management Advisory Commission met. The January meetings focused on taking positions on pending legislation. There was only one bill that the subcommittee of that organization recommended taking a position that was different than that of the department, and that was House Bill 1530, which was in Melissa's update. It relates to a butter notice for beaver dam removal. And after considering it at the full committee, they decided to just simply track it, not support it. So their positions are aligned with that of the department.
Okay. Anything else? The Lakes
The
and...
Lakes Management Committee also had a meeting last week. Very similar type of thing going on at 1530 was also discussed, and they are also just tracking it and not taking a position either way on it. And it does look like our two committees actually are going to have a joint meeting somewhere hopefully this spring or early summer to discuss cyanobacteria, and we also had a discussion about maybe just discussing dams in the state when we get together, because they do affect both committees.
Okay, great. Seacoast Commissioner, you got a report today?
Yep, I do. The first comment is related to what Josh Halloran just brought up about the lobster stock assessment. In December, there was, last week, there was a meeting at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission where the stock assessment was presented to the American Lobster Advisory Panel to determine any steps that might be necessary to manage the lobster stock. A couple of action items that have been taken to combine the indexes to better track the juvenile recruitment in the Gulf of Maine in Georges Bank. And the second area of potential study would be to estimate what the benefits would be on the lobster resource had the gauge size increased this past summer like it was originally supposed to. So they're going to do a study as to what effect not increasing the gauge size may have done. Another committee thing with the Atlantic States, they're going to continue their moratorium on harvesting of the northern Gulf of Maine shrimp for the next 3 years, and they're not going to provide any research set aside for 2026. So that's my comments. And one other thing, just last week, the governments of China and Canada agreed that the tariffs on seafood going into China would be reduced for Canadian lobsters and snow crabs. This could have an effect on the American lobster industry in that we may be shut out of the Chinese market because there's still a 25% tariff on lobsters going into China. It could be a double-edged sword because Canada has fishing seasons. So during the height of our lobster season here in the Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank, the Canadian fisheries are closed. So somehow the Chinese have a voracious appetite for lobsters, and hopefully we can get some American lobsters into China so it won't affect our pricing this year. That's it for me.
Thank you. Any other commissioners that would like to report on any of their items or actions? Commissioner Trainer?
We just received the nominations for the awards, and we're just going to be gathering for a meeting shortly. I'll just getting the fundamentals down right now, so making sure I cross my T's and dot my I's and how this works and such. So we're just getting that started. So we have 5 people so far that have been put in for different awards and such. So we'll start looking at that.
Okay.
6, I think.
6, yes, it's
Right.
6. I caused a little bit of a ruckus on one of them. Any other commissioners have anything to report? Commissioner Temple.
Yes, just wanted to report to the public that the ice is nice and thick in Sullivan County. I shared with the commission here a bunch of photos of some first graders ice fishing, catching some perch and some pickerel. It was good to have the 3 generations of fathers and sons and grandsons all catching fish and eating venison for lunch.
That's great. Any other
I
commissioners?
just want to mention to the director of the Lakes Management Advisory Committee meeting that Jared Grasscamp was there. Once again, did an excellent job representing the department. The chairman actually had to leave in the middle of the meeting, so Jared, as the vice chair, took over the meeting, did an excellent job.
Thank you. Appreciate hearing that. I'll convey your remarks to him.
Any other commissioner reports? I'm going to give a little bit of a different report, which is kind of like a chair report, so you guys know what I'm doing. One of the things that I started out by doing as chair is anytime I meet with the director, I've had the other current officers, so Commissioner Hodgson and Commissioner McGonigal present. So far they've been present for all of them outside of a chance meeting. We bumped into each other where I did proactively communicate any kind of discussions I'm having. One of my big things is transparency as a commissioner to the commission and to the public in the way we conduct business. So a few things that we've discussed. One was the distribution of the agenda. Obviously, some of us receive it mailed. We always have received it mailed. You can opt out of receiving that mailing. If you want to just keep getting it, you don't have to do anything, but if you no longer want it mailed, you're fine with just getting the PDF emailed to you and then having a printout sitting on your table when you get here. Just let Tanya know. The other thing is the minutes are going to be a little more streamlined. You will see on the next commission minutes. I'm happy to discuss it once we do a working example as far as what people's thoughts are. We did talk to legal as far as making sure that how we're doing them is compliant. One of the things that we've struggled, and I know every commissioner here has struggled with it, myself included, is sometimes we can have passionate back and forth, and it's really hard to catch detail on where people might have been sitting on a specific issue. And without Tanya just doing a verbatim script of the entire thing, it makes it near impossible. So obviously the same place you can go and get the minutes on our website, you can also go and see the entire recorded commission meeting. So you can have all that information right there. The other thing is a couple reminders on legal, because there were some questions inside the commission. One, which we talked about today, is 10 days notice for commissioners for a commissioner meeting. The public is a 24-hour notice. There is some confusion, obviously, for transparency to the public. The sooner we announce to the public, the better. So once you get your schedules worked out when you're informing each other, getting that information up as fast as possible, because we prefer to give more than 24-hour notice to the public. The other one is contacting legal counsel. So Mark, who is our counselor, there was some confusion in the past about what you could contact him with. So if there's issues regarding, let's say, an authority we have or whatever else, those requests should come through me as the chair. You can CC the vice chair and secretary. In fact, I encourage you guys to CC other members of other officers, just to continue to keep myself honest as we do work and keep things moving forward. If you ever had a question, let's say about me as the chair exercising my authority, and you had concerns about the way I was conducting myself, you can contact our legal counsel without informing me. And I just think that there's an important distinction that that is made, that you're allowed to do that. The other one is on, this is an administrative thing, paper copying. Obviously, we often need a lot of papers done, and what has happened is a lot of that falls on day of the commission meeting. The staff is already backed up trying to do their daily job on top of the commission. If you could just get those requests in for copying before the day of the meeting, so that they have time to print it out before today, so they know what's going on. That's not meant to be a jab at anybody. Myself is also guilty of that action, so nobody take that comment personally. Let's see. And then the last one, as I hand off over, I'm sorry, one other. We scheduled the middle of, essentially between commission meetings, that myself, Commissioner Hodgson, and Commissioner McGonigal meet with the executive director to discuss some of the chair's responsibilities that go on, behind the scenes. They have been present for these. We're going to continue to this middle meeting, making sure that other people are present. I've reported all the information we've discussed here. I'm going to continue to report that information to maintain this transparency. The other thing we did was reached out to the liaison to the governor's office. What's Alex's last name? Holderis. Alex Holderis. We will be meeting with him a week before every commission meeting. Again, the two other members of the committee, of the officers of the commission, will also be on that call. That's just to proactively communicate with the governor's office about our agenda and what we're up to and whatnot. Again, this is me trying to set up a more transparent form of communication, and I hope that once we get this kind of infrastructure and these rhythms in place, that when I'm no longer chair, which hopefully I won't not enjoy it too much, or will enjoy it too much or something, but if when I'm no longer doing this, that it can seamlessly go on to somebody else and these contacts can be passed on and we can continue that type of stuff. And the last thing to pass on to the director's report is on January 28th, there's going to be a 1-hour lunch break with the Fish and Game and Marine Resource Committee. That they have designated a 10-minute block in front of that hour for me to get up and discuss the commission and what we do. We're specifically going to focus on how our authority intersects with the legislative branch of government, and I'm working with Again, our 2 officers, legal counsel, just to make sure that I'm well prepped and well spoken for that 10-minute briefing, just to reiterate kind of how our authority works and how our relationship matters directly towards them, like, for instance, our taking positions on bills, that then the staff has to go and ultimately either defend or support or oppose or whatever it might be. So if any commissioners have any questions or comments, I'm happy to hear criticism, so on how we're conducting things or input. Well, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to the director's report.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'll just start off with, just wanted to make note publicly that Melissa Nemeth is now on the legislative committee as well, not just the extra group, but the committee as well. And welcome, Melissa. She's hit the ground running. She's been amazing so far, and I can only imagine what's ahead of us. Also, I just wanted to mention, too, the reference of the presentation to the Fish, Game, and Marine Resources Committee. The staff have also been invited to provide some presentations. Representative Selene, who's the chairman, he has asked us to kind of do a continuing ed sort of approach for the committee. So we will likely be presenting on the North American model and fisheries within New Hampshire. So I just wanted to make you all aware of that. So our staff will be there. It is the same day as a governor and council meeting, so I'm not likely to be present because I will be carrying our items to the governor and council, but our staff will be present and presenting. Okay, so all the good stuff that we got going on across the state. Facilities and Lands Division has been working tirelessly on repairs and upgrades. Most recently, they restored the outdoor parking lights at the Great Bay Discovery Center, and one of these long overdue items that has been sitting there, they have started the work on the fire suppression system replacement at Region 3, the Durham office, among 1,000 other things that they've been doing. But inland fisheries, the fish habitat program has been doing quite a bit of advancement in work for major habitat and fisheries initiatives. They finalized the Great Bay 2030 restoration application and collaborated with partners on a variety of culvert replacement planning projects. The staff participated in the New Hampshire Stream Crossing Initiative Implementation Subcommittee. That's where they're basically trying to pair funding sources with shovel-ready projects. They also met with several different river watershed councils to discuss a variety of culvert replacements across the state. Coldwater region, or the Coldwater group in the Inland Fisheries Division, the staff attended the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture quarterly meeting. They've also begun starting a story map. I'm interested in seeing how that comes together. Their work continues on summarizing the department's staff comments on the draft trout management plan. Once they get that summarized, then we'll be working with our stakeholders on that. They've also completed the statewide QR code angler survey. They're starting the data analysis and writing a summary report. Shout out to all the anglers who responded to that. Really appreciate the information you're providing. It's very, very critical. They are also analyzing data collected on the Fike nets that were collected over the fall. The Large Lakes Group reviewing and configuring a bunch of data that they collected during fall netting, and hydroacoustic forage fish surveys that they conducted over the summer, or over the fall, excuse me. This information will be combined and basically help us assess what our stocking targets will be for 2026 and other large lake management actions that will be taken in the upcoming year. They've also reviewed and formatted the 2025 fish survey data that was collected both internally and externally with partners, and are working on creating that final survey database. On the conservation side, they continue to enter, and this fall and winter is just data analysis. I'm just going to say that. It's just data analysis, and you saw the effect of that with the great presentation that was given here today by Josh. So we're finalizing a variety of data analysis and wrapping up a variety of reports. Also looking at finalizing environmental review guidelines for threatened and endangered fish species, and they're working on a proposal for Oyster River Watershed Management Plan. The Warm Water Group, they're prepping fish scales for aging, and they're entering data from the summer field work as well. People might be wondering, how's the hatchery coming along? Well, weather has been harsh, but the contractors have been pushing forward and are making great headway. They've laid steel girders and trusses and roofing and some of the new buildings, and at Berlin and New Hampton both fisheries continue to work on dispersing brook trout eggs to the schools for their trout in the classroom programs. So it's been very successful so far. Even during the construction, we've still been able to produce fish. Wildlife Division, the non-game staff continue to work with DES on the transition for the environmental review program. And the game program is working hard on turkey capture efforts, which next month I have put them online to give you a presentation on that research project, so get you integrated into what's going on there and why we're capturing turkeys. So with any luck, you'll have maybe some videos even, who knows, we'll see, but you'll have a good presentation on that. The Habitat program is very active. They're still recruiting for a land agent position, but even while they're recruiting for that, they're also recruiting for a technical assistant biologist, which would be located in Region 2. We had some shifts in staff when Jake DeBow took over the fur leader position. So we've got a technical assistant biologist position opening, so we're looking for a good quality person who can work on advising the public and private landowners and assisting with wildlife and habitat management infrastructure projects. Staff have also been working on developing a long-term wildlife habitat and infrastructure management plan for all of our management areas across the state. They are also looking at finalizing a federal aid application to conserve nearly 900 acres in Antrim, Bennington, and Hancock. The property contains, I guess, excellent access where public can enjoy hunting, fishing, trapping, wildlife viewing for generations. I mean, it's an incredible piece of property from my understanding and what I've seen. The project has a significant support and financial contributions coming from the towns of Antrim and Bennington, and also an anonymous business owner. So we're looking forward to wrapping that up and seeing if we can get that secured. Marine Division, you've seen a lot of what Marine Division is doing on a daily. The staff continue to do several rainbow smelt angler surveys. They've prepared federal compliance data. They've coordinated fish passage projects and participated in many regional committees. The Marine Chief just participated in the strategic planning for New England Fisheries Management Council. They also participated or have been appointed to the Pease Development Authority Revolving Loan Fund Committee, which met last month, or this month, I guess, met on the 14th. And the purpose of that is to provide low-interest loans to members of the commercial fish industry. Givner, our reserve, they've hosted the Bayview lecture, what's happening in our big trees. And that was an interesting lecture. They had a guest lecturer also come and speak on forestry. They had 39 members of the public there and 5 staff attended. They also had a Once Upon the Estuary preschool winter session began. They had 12 students scheduled for every class. All classes filled up for the entire winter season. On the research and land stewardship side, staff are tasked currently with developing restoration plans for 3 New Hampshire marshes. The manager of the Givner, Corey, is on the steering committee for the projects. She reviewed a draft site summaries and has developed an agenda for the first full team meeting. Research staff is also working with the education staff on enhancing our science communications through standalone annual water quality reports, and also looking at potential magazine prints to focus highlights on our research that we're conducting there. Training and engagement team, their training and research staff are developing a virtual workshop on how best to facilitate marsh migration as part of the coastal restoration efforts. And they had their second meeting with a multi-organizational planning team, and they had several invited speakers What they're looking to do is build a collaborative project that would be funded beginning April 2026. They got the confirmation that it would be funded, so we're looking forward to seeing what they can develop with that program. Law enforcement, Colonel Jordan. I can't even say enough. The firearms season is now closed, and the officers, of course, have been very busy. They're still investigating many night hunting cases. Fortunately, though, it's been a relatively safe season, I would say. We've had a couple of incidents involving hunters with medical issues, but we have avoided any major consequences or incidents. Conservation officers continuing to make hunting cases, baiting violation cases, and various other violations across the state. They just finished their block training just recently. We had our 3 new conservation officers have completed all of their headquarters training. They transitioned to the field and were assigned to districts. They have completed all their physical fitness standards, and they are scheduled to attend the upcoming police academy classes this winter. In fact, we had our first trainee start this month. So we're on a good track. We just had hiring exams and physical agility tests held in December. We had 22 potential candidates come out of that. And I think of those, we've narrowed it down to less than a dozen. I was going to say half a dozen or so. Yeah, 6 were selected to proceed to the next phase. OHRE registrations are coming in strong and outpacing previous year's numbers, which is great. As the season shifts, of course, we are preparing more for snow machine safety and getting that word out and helping to remind people how to operate those safely and participating in a multimedia approach regarding winter safety overall, including ice safety. Currently, we're using every media outlet that we possibly can to remind hikers also to prepare for winter conditions. We still continue to have rescue missions up there, but hoping that those can come down. Public affairs, well, the saltwater digests are out. I think you've all seen that. If you don't have one, we'll make sure you get one. Also, Public Affairs has posted the 2025 State Wildlife Action Plan, which, again, we had many kudos over. In fact, you'll hear later, but I had another phone call from the Fish and Wildlife Service just praising us on that report. They also they have a new merchandising page up, and they're running the sales of the calendar, which I don't know if we even have any left at this point. We have a few, okay, but they're really reduced, so get your calendar now if you don't have it already. They also just released a new opportunity for customers and interested parties to subscribe to our New Hampshire Wildlife Journal magazine online. So check that out if you want to become an online recipient of the magazine. And then our conservation education team, they have submitted their annual report for Project Wild, and I just wanted to highlight this a little bit because it's really, I think it's quite impressive. Overall, they've had 16 different workshops with a total of 188 participants. And they range from the standard Project Wild to Aquatic Wild, Growing Up Wild, Project Wet, Aquatic Wet, I mean, just a variety of programs. Growing Up Wild, Learning Tree Early, and Advanced Special Topic Workshops. So I think that it's pretty impressive to see this. When you see those numbers and you finally see what everything's coming together and how the year's wrapping up here, I'm just impressed with what the staff are able to achieve. Also, we've launched a new social media campaign called Critters with Kayla. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but if you haven't, you need to check out our Facebook page. It's featuring our watershed education specialist, Kayla, and she highlights new species in each video. She describes the notable characteristics of each of the critters, as she calls them critters. And it's kind of just an integral, I guess, a general entertaining, informational bit. And it's real quick and easy, and they're fun to watch. And she's just got such a great personality, so I'm super excited about that. It's on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you can find it. Also, our Trout in the Classroom program recently received a $3,000 donation from the Merrimack River Valley Trout Unlimited chapter, and I want to thank them for that because it's a significant contribution to that program. From the Director's Office, I just want to mention a couple of things. From the human resources side, we're still facing challenges filling our positions because we are limited to only opening them to current state employees and internal advertisement, basically. We are not, without getting a waiver, we cannot just broadcast positions outside of internal. And it's limited our candidates that we can select from. It's limited the people who might have the qualifications. I mean, many of our positions require unique skills and experience. And so I've been having to go forward, Dee has been writing these up, and I've been having to go forward and working with the governor's office to continually ask for waivers to get an external advertisement for many of our positions. But we're getting there. Many of our waivers have been approved, so that's been helpful, but nonetheless, it does delay our process. From the federal aid side, some new things have come through from the federal components. And there's a variety of standard operating procedures that are now being revised or in development. And so the federal aid team, our coordinator and the assistant, are currently working on uploading those into our repository and getting us in compliance with the new standards. The federal aid administrator is participating in the federal audit process and coordinating uploads of those required documents. There's a monthly newsletter detailing new federal grant opportunities that's in development, and she's going to be distributing that to our division chiefs so we can be maybe up front and center a little bit more efficiently for potential grants. Our federal aid specialist is evaluating all of our annual and final report due dates for the active grants and sending notifications and emails to our program managers so that we can ensure we have timely submissions on our grants and that we don't miss out on any potential opportunities. There's also, the specialist is also completing all the federal wildlife, sport, fish, restoration on demand projects leaders course so that she has a better understanding and can help facilitate, again, more efficiency within our division and within our agency. Some of the key things that they did complete over the last month of December, we had, I guess, 6 total grants that either needed a final performance review or extensions and such. Anyway, so we got our NOAA final performance review submitted. There was 1 pending on that one. We had our wildlife, sport, fish restoration final performance review submitted. Those were 2 reports that were due. And we also had an annual performance report that was needed for 3 projects. And we got all of those in on time and received massive kudos from the Fish and Wildlife Service for meeting our deadlines. From the director's office again, department-wide highlights from my desk. Our new legal and legislative coordinator is hired. She's been extremely busy and active. She's got us working very closely together, actively reviewing and tracking legislation, coordinating with you all on these matters. I think so far I've seen what I consider a very efficient process. If you have any ideas or suggestions, the things that we should be doing differently, please let us know. Melissa's really getting her feet under her, and I think she's doing well so far, but certainly open for any improvements. Myself and staff are actively engaged in identifying an appropriate path forward to develop, upgrade, implement a more user-friendly, state-of-the-art customer relations management system for Fish and Game. We are looking at ways to fund that and ways to implement something that hopefully will be more customer-friendly, user-friendly, more efficient for our staff, and help us expand our abilities to generate revenue and market our agency on many fronts, not just the science, but other ways as well. We're also looking at continuing our effort to update the immediate ride option for the OHRV that was asked, directed by the governor. She had asked us to do that. We finally got the quote, which I mentioned was, $17,000. We're working in how to fund that, and we're working with the vendor on how to make that, implement that, and make that an effective means for this program. Then more to come on that. I suspect it's going to take couple more months before we have a final product that's rolled out, but I'll keep you updated on that one. Also, as I said, I did have a nice phone call, conversation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they extended many accolades about our staff, both for the work on the State Wildlife Action Plan, but just on the federal grant process and other things that we're engaging with them. I did finally receive a formal letter from Fish and Wildlife Service Director Brian Nesvik announcing the approval of our action plan. So we have a formal approval, not just a verbal. DOIT is continuing to progress with developing our more expansive IT network connectivity among all of our offices. There are a few snags that we've run into, but they're definitely making progress there, and I think next month we'll be starting to facilitate maybe the first office to be upgraded. So looking forward to that. On the federal level, there are quite a few things flying on the federal level. I don't know if you all pay attention to those things, but one really key thing that happened recently is on Tuesday, January 16th, Paul Johansson, he's the president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. He testified during an oversight hearing on Capitol Hill, which was focused on hunting, fishing, access in the great outdoors. And he used that opportunity to really emphasize the vital role that both the users, hunters, fishers, and anglers, recreationists play in sustaining America's systems of conservation funding. But he also demonstrated how those investments in habitat and access, he emphasized the relationship between the state and federal governments, how that really strengthens wildlife populations and outdoor opportunities. I think his testimony was really phenomenal. If you get a chance to look it up, I think it's important for you guys to just hear what he's saying as an agency, as the president of the Association of the Agencies. I think it's important for you all to be aware of that. Also, there's a couple of the different things that are going on. The Senate passed a package of 3 spending bills, which included one for the Interior Department. Hopefully that will proceed. The bill is expected to be signed into law by President Trump here soon. That's going to basically continue the trend of individual appropriations becoming law. On Tuesday the 13th, I think it was the 13th, the Department of Interior issued a secretarial order which is expanding hunting, fishing access and removing unnecessary boundaries. That's mostly around the federal lands, but it does play a part in our relationship with those federal partners, so we want to kind of track that and see how that moves forward. Additionally, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published 2 new rules in the register. One is the administrative rules on Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration, Dingell-Johnson Restoration Acts. That's again some of that, I guess, governing the administration of those funds. That's again why we have our federal aid coordinator sort of redefining the SOPs. So you might be interested in looking that up, and you might want to pay attention to that one. And then the other one is the implementation of the Pittman-Robertson Dingell-Johnson sport fish, but it's a second docket, and where's my note on that one? It's a second docket that looks at target practice and marksmanship and training support for that, and then modernizing the Pittman-Robertson Fund for tomorrow's needs. So that's the director's report. Sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied today. I don't know why. Probably because I'm just tired. But yeah, any questions? Anything I can?
Any
Yes.
commissioners?
Yeah, well,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
on the last topic that you just raised, does that, in my simple mind, think that there may be money in the future that would assist rod and gun clubs or fishing clubs or hunting clubs, partnering with 4-H on shooting programs and stuff like that, or is that
I think what it
really off base?
it's partially on base.
Okay.
Yes, it will assist with the idea of creating a funding source, but I think the tricky part here, or the difference, is that you're saying rod and gun clubs and all these, it would be through the state,
Okay.
in partnership with the states.
Commissioner Stoll?
When I was coming south this morning, I stopped at Region 1 to pick up any relays. They had no relays, but they had no furniture in any of the rooms there.
Yes.
What's going on there?
They're replacing the carpet.
What do you do with all those desks and file cabinets?
They went to the armory. They're in our other building in Lancaster, in the Armory. DNCR is replacing the carpet in the building.
The Armory is where we need to go, but anyway, I made my statement. Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner McGonigal?
Critters with Kayla, it's great.
It is.
Thank you.
I think it probably reaches out and connects with a certain demographic that's much broader maybe than usually that we run.
Thank you. I'll convey that.
Yeah.
She'll appreciate hearing that. I thought it was awesome too.
Any other commissioners for the director? As always, thank you, very thorough, and you guys are very busy, and I appreciate it. Now I'm going to do a call to the public. If you could just say who you are and where you're from, but anybody from the public like to say anything?
Always me, right?
Yeah, that's okay. No, he still is.
Good morning and Happy New Year. My name is Representative Catherine Harvey from Cheshire 6, which is Chesterfield, Hinsdale, and Westmoreland, and I serve as the ranking member on the Fish and Game Committee. So if you bear with me a couple of thoughts, yes, while you were talking, I Googled Critters with Kayla. It's great. They're like 1 minute and 17 seconds long, and they're a lot of fun, so thank you for that. I'm so glad that you're going to do a presentation on the North American model. Chairman Spillane asked committee members for ideas for presentations, workshops, he calls it professional development, and that was one that I actually submitted because I feel like a lot of the representatives on the Fish and Game Committee turn over and don't even know that such a model even exists. So I'm glad that you chose that one and are going to go forward with that. Thank you very much for that. I would like to just express a little bit of concern concerning Resolution 15. This is a resolution that we need 60% of the House and Senate to pass, and I believe 2/3 of the citizens of New Hampshire to pass before it becomes an amendment to our New Hampshire Constitution. I have some concerns about this because I understand that it is modeled after other states' amendments to their constitutions. However, if in the future there is any problem with this amendment for our state is quite different than others, so any problem that might come up in this amendment for the state of New Hampshire can only be corrected through another new amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution. And that is a very, very difficult process. It's not like if there's a problem in an RSA, we can present another RSA to fix it. This would require another constitutional amendment that requires that 60% and 2/3 of the state. That's a big bar, and so I'm very concerned about that. I'm also concerned because I don't see a need for it. I don't think that there's anybody in our state, unless they've done something really stupid and have broken many of the hunting, the fishing, and trapping laws, there's nobody that's been denied the right to follow the sport of their choice. So I'm not sure why it is anything that's even needed at this time. And I'm also concerned about the enforcement of this. If somebody, and I understand that there's a line, I've read it, that says we are to follow all of our current RSAs. However, I know that the first time somebody breaks a law, either in poaching or hunts on land that's posted or whatever it might be, the first cry that comes out of their mouth is going to be, but I have a constitutional amendment to hunt. And I've also heard Colonel Jordan say at a listening session that he might be able to overturn such a cry. However, it just makes his job harder. Well, why are you doing that? Why would you make Colonel Jordan's job harder? So I'm concerned about the enforcement and the idea that the first thing a person is going to say is, well, I have a constitutional right to hunt or fish, despite the fact that there is a line in there that says you still must conform to any other laws. This is a pretty big bar, 60%. It doesn't happen very often in the House and the Senate, and 2/3 of the state is even harder. I know that Vermont has had this in their constitution since the state was founded, probably because they had to. Back when the state was founded, if you wanted to eat, you probably hunted. You didn't go to Hannaford's. So there have been attempts to take it out of their constitution, and those have not passed because it is such a high bar to reach. And so I don't know if I'm optimistic about this passing or not, I guess is the bottom line. However, what it says to people, I believe, and it said this to me the first time I read it, you've poked the bear. There are people in our state who believe that some sports are not humane, trapping being one of them. And by supporting such an amendment, the first thought that went through my mind, and probably others too, was if this doesn't reach that 60% and the 2/3, man, we better, and I say the word we, not mean necessarily me, but speaking in terms of people who believe that trapping is inhumane, better hurry up and put in an RSA to ban trapping. And you've poked the bear. As far as I know, there was no thought about doing that beforehand, but there is now, because there is an amendment saying, we want to make this a right. And if it doesn't reach that high threshold of 60 and 2/3, I would strongly suspect that you may get an RSA that now wants to ban trapping because you've awoken that thought. So I just put those thoughts out there. Perhaps you might want to consider neither supporting or opposing this, but just watch how it travels through the House and the Senate. I think there are some, while I understand the purpose of this bill, I think there are some very dangerous issues that are connected with this bill, and I would urge you to just give that a little bit of thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, and you didn't allow questions from the audience when there was a presentation. So I'm going to just put this question out here, maybe somebody can get back to me. So we did pass a bill that allowed scuba divers to take lobsters, and I'm just wondering if that bill had any effect on the prevalence of our lobster population.
Director, do you want?
I'm not aware. I'll have to look into it. I didn't think
Thank
the
you.
bill passed, actually.
What was the question?
About lobsters. It was about diving for lobsters.
I didn't think that actually passed.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't have it.
Well,
Well, I can answer that question because I worked on that bill, because I am in favor of scuba divers taking lobsters. I spent more time underwater off the coast of New Hampshire, so I know that the impact of doing that is far less than any other kind of lobstering. However, it becomes a political question. I think 400 or 500 pounds of lobster taken by scuba divers every year, but it had much impact on the 7 million pounds that are landed. Anyway, that's not what I originally came up here for, but I urge you, the next time it comes up as a bill, to look at it a little more closely and take into consideration experts like myself that know about this. I was really, I want to really commend the presentation by, is he still here?
No, he's off and running.
Back in the 70s, when I was just a mere lad of 30, I set all those programs up for Norman Doe Associates because I was the manager of all the Seabrook Station baseline studies. And I've been following the use of that for predicting the lobster shops and so forth. And I collaborate a lot with Rick Wally, who used to be the head up until just recently of the Maine Lobster Institute, who was a co-author of the paper that wrote that. And I talked to him about it quite a bit, and I think you don't need me to say that, but what Dr. Clemens can do, my understanding of some of the issues that the offset of the calamus, I guess, the high levels of density of calamus, how that coincides temporally with lobsters. But I was glad to see the programs I set up back in the early 70s, both plankton and Houston, as well as the bottom vacuums that I developed, actually have come to use. Anyway, with that, I'll leave you to think about diving for lobsters.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, didn't I do that?
Yeah, it's Weldon Bosworth.
Weldon, Bosworth, Guilford.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public? Nobody else? I will entertain a motion to end this meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? All right.
What time is it? 3:03.